Good evening, and welcome to week 2 of Catalyst. This 8-week summer series will focus on how Celebrate Recovery is a catalyst for transformation. And not only are you going to learn the 8 principles of Celebrate Recovery, but through these conversations, you're going to hear from people who've actually experienced transformation in their life. You know, applying these principles to our life is hard work. It takes effort. But the transformation is actually God's work, and that's his plan for everyone. These principles are based on Jesus' teaching from the book of Matthew called the Beatitudes, and that word means happy or blessing. And so when we work these principles in our life, that doesn't necessarily mean that our life is going to be perfect and that we're never going to have any problems. But there is a blessing that comes from having a right relationship with God and from learning to live our life in the way that God created us to live. And so even when our life is hard, and even when we're experiencing painful hardships, like, for example, this pandemic, we can still have an inner blessing and happiness, a peace that comes from God, because we're learning to live out our life the way that God created us to. You know, the world's way of finding blessing or happiness is very different. It's based on pleasure. It's based on material things. It's based on, you know, vacations and relationships and having things a certain way in our life. And those are not wrong things. They're not bad, but they're temporal. And we can have all those things in our life and yet still be very broken inside. And so the blessing or happiness that Jesus is talking about in the Beatitudes is something that's eternal. It comes from a spiritual connection with God, that deep contentment, that inner joy that cannot be manufactured from our circumstances. It's a sense of well-being with God no matter what is happening in your life, and that is a blessing. And I think that some of you probably know what I'm talking about when, you know, things in your life are just turned upside down, and yet you can have that inner contentment and peace that comes from God. So tonight, Jamie and Francine and Rich and I are going to have a conversation about Principle 2. Principle 2 says, earnestly believe that God exists, that I matter to him, and that he has the power to help me recover. Happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Matthew 5:4. Happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. You know, it sounds kind of contradictory. How can we be happy when we're mourning? It's sort of like last week we talked about happy are those who know that they're spiritually poor. It sounds kind of negative. But what Jesus is talking about mourning, although it can mean the actual loss of someone or something, it's also the deep grieving when we come to that point in our life when we recognize our life is unmanageable. We have brokenness and pain from our own sin, from the sin of others, and we bring that brokenness to God. And the comfort comes when we enter into that relationship with God and we experience his forgiveness, we experience the healing, and we experience learning to live out our life in the way that he created us to. So let's unpack this Principle 2. Earnestly believe that God exists. Now that is not a casual position. You know, a lot of people can say, I believe that God exists. I believe he created the world. I believe he's all powerful. But yet it doesn't really change the way they live their life. Nothing has been influenced at all. So earnestly believing is a sincere conviction, and it means that it is going to impact the way that you live out your life. It's like here at Compass Point, we believe that we want to be so impacted by our relationship with Jesus Christ that we're compelled to live differently. So it's not just saying we believe it, but it's going to change the way that we live our life. So it's one thing to believe with conviction that God exists, but now the second part, I matter to him and he has the power to help me recover. That's something very different. This involves knowing who God is, knowing the truth about who God is, because the truth is you do matter to God. And the truth is he does have the power to help you recover. However, if we have a distorted view of God, this second part might be really hard for you to believe. You might be able to repeat it every week at Celebrate Recovery, but you don't really believe it. And so it's going to be really hard for you to apply it to your life. So as we unpack this principle tonight, I want you to think, even now, as you're watching this video, what do you believe? Do you earnestly believe that God exists? Do you believe that you matter to him and that he has the power to help you recover? These are really important questions for us to consider tonight. There was a time in my life that I did believe in God. In fact, I honestly don't remember a time that I didn't believe in God. Even as a little girl growing up, I'd be walking down the road and I'd look at the flowers and the birds, and I fully believed in my heart that God created the world. But it wasn't personal to me. It was distant. It was more objective. I believed he was all powerful. I prayed, but I actually wondered, did he hear my prayer? I wasn't connected to God. And so I didn't have a truthful knowledge or experience of who God is. My view of him was very distorted, as was my view of myself was very distorted. And so I wanted to believe that God loved me. I wanted to believe that I mattered to him, but I didn't have that insurance. So in order to apply this principle to our life, we have to believe the truth of who God is, the truth of what the Bible says about who God is. We have to have an accurate view of God and also an accurate view of ourselves, of how God sees us and our true identity. So for me, applying this second principle was a gradual process over time. It did not happen overnight. As I grew spiritually in my relationship with God, and I began to identify the lies that I believed about God, about myself, others, life in general. Over time, as I was built up in the truth from reading the Bible and learning and growing, I renewed my mind, and I came to that place where I was able to say with sincere conviction, I earnestly believe that God exists. And I do believe that I matter to him. And I do have the belief and the faith to believe that he would help me. And particularly at that time, it was with my depression. Before that, I didn't actually believe. I prayed, but I didn't have that assurance. And so for me, it was a gradual thing over time to get to that point of renewing my mind and believing the truth of who God is, that he does exist. I do matter to him, and he has the power to help me recover. So tonight, that's really the question I want to begin with. I want you to be thinking about that as you're watching this video. And I'm going to begin with Jamie tonight and ask you, Jamie, what do you believe? Do you earnestly believe that God exists, that you matter to him, and that he has the power to help you recover? Tell us where you're at.
Yeah, I definitely believe that now. But as you've mentioned, I can relate to a number of things that you said, Glenda, as you were opening, that there were just a number of stumbling blocks in my way to be able to even believe that God existed in a way that was relevant to my journey. I do remember that I believed he was there, but that he was distant and didn't care about my situation, what I was going through, or any of my struggles, because I had a distorted view of the father figure that God was. So I think that in the beginning, it was very challenging for me to believe that he existed as a person who loved me and wanted what was best for me. because I did believe in him. And so, yeah, it was a progress that happened over time. And I would say that a lot of it, of my growing in earnestly believing that God exists and that He loves me, was due to the community of Celebrate Recovery, just by example, people leading by example, and just kind of coming around me and loving on me as I was growing in my journey. I think that the community was a massive part of that journey for me. It needed to be there in place because I don't think I would have found it without it.
Wow, thank you. You know, I think it's important what you're saying about the community, because sometimes we actually see that relationship that other people have with God, and that becomes an example for us. And it's like, wow, that's what I want. That, you know, I need that. So it's not just our relationship with God and pressing into Him ourselves, but God actually uses the people. Absolutely. Francine, what about you?
Well, for me, it was basically the same as you, Glenda. I always believed in God. I grew up going to church and going to church twice on Sundays, but for me, it was more of a rules and regulations thing. If you go to church twice on Sundays and you do the things, and then He's not existent from Monday to Saturday, and so there was no relationship. So it was, for me, it was really a conditional love. It took me many years of coming to Celebrate Recovery and learning the teachings and hearing other people. And I remember walking into Celebrate Recovery and seeing peace and joy in some of the people's eyes, and I just went, I want that. I want what they have, because I didn't have that. To me, God's love was all conditional, just because that's what I've always grown up with, was conditional love. It took me about 3 years of coming to Celebrate Recovery and really digging deep into the teachings and talking with people and really understanding of that unconditional love. And it was a pretty amazing thing when it finally got from here to my heart. And it was a process for me as well. It was hard to fathom at times. It was hard to, when I messed up, that God still loved me anyways. But it was an amazing thing when I felt that peace and just that serenity, that true serenity of knowing that God loved me no matter what. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm really grateful for Celebrate Recovery, for that teachings and the community of sisterhood, and just really helping me and encouraging me to really get that from from the head to the heart sort of thing. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Francine. You know, I think it's important what you say, that it took about 3 years of you coming to Celebrate Recovery. Sometimes I think that we have the idea that, you know, if I say these principles, if I repeat them every week, you know, I should be able to get it. But it's because we have that brokenness, because, you know, and we all come in, you know, we're in different places when we come, and you know, God has to do that work on the inside. And for some people, certain aspects of this can take much longer, but it's a process, and it's okay. And I think that's an encouragement to all of us here tonight, and the people that are watching this video, that, you know, hang in there. You know, sometimes it takes time, and that's okay. Thank you so much. Rich, what about you?
Yeah, if I can sort of step back a few years, even growing up, I went to church, but I remember making a very conscious decision that I was going to pursue my life on my terms in high school, and not, and really just there was a tension there between how I was living and what I believed God, how I believed God thought, how I thought God wanted me to live. And then in university, God reached out to me, and at that point, I went, "Wow, you know, God is doing something in my life." I studied the Bible. I became a Christian. I started really. I had a strong passion for God at that time, um, but it was, I'd use a different word than Francine, but it was very similar. It was very conditional. It was performance based. So I saw God as, I struggled to understand about God's love, and that he wanted to have a relationship with me. It was more about, well, if I want to go to heaven, I got to do things God's way. And I really developed that mindset, or I think that mindset stemmed from how I viewed God. And I didn't view God as someone who cared about me specifically. And it's funny because I thought, well, God cares about other people. Does God have the power to fill in the blank, to help me to change, to uh, for sure, he has that power, and he will do it in other people's lives, but he just won't do it in my life. And I think that's where I really struggled. And I realized, through a few interactions, I remember being brought to tears by a man who was trying to help me through some of this, I'll say, broken thinking. And he said, what kind of father do you deserve? And I'm like, well, I don't, I'm a bad person. I don't deserve anything good. And my son was about 3 years old, and he said, well, what kind of father does your son deserve? And I remember that just cut me, because I realized that, that's how God sees me. And it started a shift. And I think even when I started coming out to Celebrate Recovery, I still didn't have that, does God really, I think I was developing that. But that's something that I think comes from a profound sense of unworthiness that I'm still working through. So absolutely, intellectually, I believe that. Do I still struggle with it? It depends on the day. um, does God have the power to help me recover? Yeah, absolutely. He's all powerful, there's no question. For me, it's not does he have the power, it's will he. And that's the thing that I still continue to battle with. But I've seen it happen. And times when I've remember one time standing in my kitchen, and I was just really struggling with a temptation. And I just thought, and this was when I'd been coming out to CR for a while. And I just thought, I'm just going to ask God, to take this away. And I did. And lo and behold, the temptation was gone. It was kind of a new experience for me, as someone who'd been a Christian for a very long time. And I realized, wow, this stuff actually works. Like, God does care about me. And I'd like to say that I'm a poster child for that, but I still have, it's still a journey. But yeah, so.
Thank you, Rich. The thing that really is coming to me as we're all talking tonight is we're talking about transformation and how applying these principles to our life results in transformation. But that transformation is lifelong. As long as we're here on this earth, God is still transforming us. There's always going to be areas that we're still going to be struggling. But as long as we're moving forward down that path, it's getting better. The distortions and the challenges, lessen, and God, the work that God is doing in our life will increase. So I think for all of us, we can have days where we still struggle to believe, we have our doubts. So when we come to God, when we recognize our life is unmanageable, it can look very different for each one of us. And I've heard all of your stories. I know a bit about your background, and we have very different life experiences. For some of us, it could be a situation of abuse, it could be depression, codependency, broken relationships, addictive behaviors. Very often it's a combination of a lot of different things. But when we bring that pain and all that brokenness to God, our sinful reactions, our heartache to God, we mourn and we grieve. And, the Bible talks about godly sorrow when we are repenting and coming to God in that place and asking him to help us, to heal us, to forgive us. But Jesus says in this teaching that happy are those who mourn. So when we're grieving and when it's painful and when we're bringing it all to him and surrendering, God will comfort us. And there is a blessing and a happiness that comes out of that place. Mourning can be hard, but I want to consider tonight, how is it that God comforts us when we're mourning? When we get to that place of saying, my life is unmanageable, I'm going to surrender to God, I'm going to bring it all to him. And I know for me, when I got to that place, I honestly didn't bring everything all at once. I think sometimes there were things in my heart and in my life that I hadn't even unpacked yet, didn't even know was there. So it's not like all of a sudden we come to God and we surrender our life and everything's going to change 100%. It's a process. And I think that's a good word tonight as we think about this principle. But when I got to this place of earnestly believing that God exists, that I mattered to him, because for most of my life, I didn't believe that. Much like Rich said, I believed that God loved other people, but because I had such a distorted view of myself, I didn't believe it for myself. But I did believe that he had the power to heal me from this depression. And there was a comfort that was coming into my heart, an assurance, a confidence that God is real. You know, I could feel his presence, I could experience his love. And so I had the assurance that while I was praying, he actually heard me. So he was no longer distant. So that comfort that came of knowing that, wow, I do matter to God. So it gave me courage to trust him more, because I realize now in looking back that I wasn't really trusting him because I didn't really believe that I mattered to him. So my healing and my recovery, especially in that area of depression and anxiety, and I mean, there were other things as well that I was struggling with, it was not instant. It was not a quick fix. I still struggled for a while. But as I brought all that pain to God, I began to experience something that was not there before. I had hope. I began to experience that assurance that God loves me and that I matter to him, and that somehow, some way, he is going to get me through this. And that comfort gave me the courage to keep taking the next step and keep moving forward. Whereas before, I didn't have that assurance. So I was so stuck and I was going in circles, and the depression was just getting worse. So I still battled depression and anxiety, as I said, and other challenges as well. But because I had that underlying comfort and hope from God, I knew that I was going to get through it. So as I continued to grow spiritually and grow in my relationship with God, it gave me that courage just to keep going forward. So as you think tonight, Jamie, I'm going to start with you again, to getting to this point in your recovery of recognizing your life was unmanageable and, you know, bringing this brokenness and pain to God. How did you experience God's comfort, or how have you experienced God's comfort to help you keep going?
Well, I have an answer for the question, but I'm not sure after hearing yours if mine's right or not. So we're going to go with it and see what happens. So I think one of the main struggles that I came to celebrate recovery with, apart from alcohol and depression and all of that, was really self-identity. I had no idea who I was, or even why I was here. I had a real issue for a long time with just even being here, because life was so unmanageable. And I think during the process, and everybody said it tonight so greatly, that it doesn't happen immediately. But over time, I think during the process, that God really helped me to see who I was, who he created me to be, and allow me to step into that. And it was through Celebrate Recovery and my own home church that I realized that the person he created me to be was to be a person of service, to jump in wherever help is needed. And I just really learned to lean into that. And I know I've said it before, and you guys, some people are probably sick of me saying it, but this idea of saying yes whenever I'm asked to do something that I know will benefit my recovery, that I know is good for me. If I say yes to it, that God will use that. And I think that's how he's comforted me over the last few years, is just by leading me down this path of saying yes to all of these things that have been a benefit to my recovery, both personally in helping me to see who he's created me to be, but also by developing relationships that were at a time difficult for me because I was so closed off to everyone, that it was just impossible to create good, positive, lasting relationships. And so the development over the last couple of years of God leading me down this path is really where he has comforted me as I've mourned all of the past, all of the struggles that I faced.
Wow, thank you. You know, the thing that stands out to me in what you said, Jamie, is that God comforted you as you were serving others, as you were saying yes. And, prior to that, you struggled with understanding your identity, who you were, should I even be here? And so there is a comfort that comes and a blessing that comes from knowing that God has given you a purpose. You are here for a reason. And wow, what a comfort that has been for you. That is awesome. Thank you. Francine.
Oh, I've really felt God's comfort. These last 8 years have been a little difficult here, and just mourning the loss of relationships lost and of broken loved ones, and I've just really, those times when I've just when I've had to just let go of the control and just surrender it all and just say, I can't do this anymore, Lord. I just can't. And I remember particularly one morning I was sitting there in my quiet time, and I was sitting on the couch and just watching the sunrise, and I was just like, I just can't. And it was almost like I could actually feel him beside me and just with his arms around me and just saying, I've got it, it's okay. And in doing that, like you, Glenda, it gave me hope, and it gave me the strength, and it kept me going. And I know that God was there with me, and I know that he will always be there with me, just right beside me, helping me the whole way. And so every time I feel that time when I'm like, I just can't do this anymore, I think back at that time and just how encouraging that was for me, and just really feeling him with me. And I feel as I just continue to read his word and really know who he is. For me, this is the big thing, is reading the Bible and knowing who he is and learning more about him, and learning about his love and his mercy and his righteousness. And I feel I can trust him more and more and more. And so in that, I just that comforts me greatly. You mentioned it gives you happiness. I wouldn't say it gives me happiness sometimes, but it gives me that peace, and that everything is going to be all right, because I know God only wants what's best for me. And I always say to people, like, I'm only in the middle of his book. He knows the ending, and it's going to be good. And I can just trust him as I go page through page of what this story is going to be like. And so I'm so grateful for Celebrate Recovery. I'm so grateful for my sisters and my brothers who keep encouraging me to keep moving forward. And I'm so grateful to God that he just keeps, I just know he's there, and it just really, really helps me.
Thank you, Francine. It really strikes me that in our relationship with God, it is personal. And, the Bible says that he is an ever-present help in trouble. And yet we don't always feel him all the time, but there are those moments that God allows us to experience his presence, just to hang on, And so, in you sharing that is an encouragement that God does want to remind us that he is with us all the time, whether we feel it or whether we don't. But that gives us the hope to keep going. Rich.
Yeah, I find the biggest thing that's been how do I say this? Jesus has a face. I think it's quite often, in my experience, it's found in the most unlikely places. And I think the community of Celebrate Recovery has been the biggest way that God's comforted me through my time of recovery. and which I am currently in. I don't know if that sounded past tense, but and it's been times when and sometimes it's the guy who maybe I look at and I don't have a lot of respect for, or who's irritating to me, and then something that they do or say just makes me go, wow, I see God at work in this person's life. Or it's at times when I just I need my butt kicked, and somebody has enough love in their heart to look at me, see me for where I am and where I'm at, and love me enough to say the straight truth to me, even if that's uncomfortable for them. And it's and then there's just times where I'm having a rough day, and just showing up, and I'm not even sure that I want to be here tonight type of a night. And just somebody smile, or there's always Russ always seems to be at the door with his hand out, shaking your hand. And it's just people like that, and just those I'm like, that's another face of Jesus, just where he's greeting me with that. And so I think it's all of those together for me that are the comfort. Can God or does God comfort me directly? Absolutely, I believe that. But I found in my experience it's really the people that I'm surrounded by who give me that, who I see God's comfort through. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you all for sharing tonight, and thank you for those of you who are watching the video this evening. And we are going to wrap up now, but as we've been talking about this idea of principle 2, and what is it you actually believe? Do you believe that God exists? Do you believe that you matter to him, that he has the power to help you recover? And maybe, just like we've talked about tonight, maybe you're somewhere in the process. Maybe you want to believe, but maybe you have a lot of doubts. Maybe your experience growing up has really caused you to have a distorted view of God and of yourself, perhaps. But I want to encourage you tonight, don't give up. And ask God to help you renew your mind with what the truth is. And just like we've shared tonight, it's a process, and it's okay. We're not in a race. This transformation is God's plan for us, and it's in God's timing and in God's ways. So whether he allows us to experience that comfort directly from him sometimes, or whether it's through a brother or sister, that God comforts us in a very different way. So as we wrap up tonight, I want to give my friends here tonight the opportunity just to share a closing word that as we wind up. Jamie, do you have any final comments that you want to leave everybody with?
Yeah, I'd like to first say that I'm happy Rich is here, because both weeks he's given me a final comment, because otherwise I just wouldn't have anything. So it's been great. I think what I would say is that when I first came to Celebrate Recovery, I always thought, well, if I just was here, if I just got to this point, then everything would be okay. And I think what I've learned over time is that it's a journey, not a destination. While that seems kind of quirky, it's become very true to me, because each time I get to where I think if I just got to, it just opens up the door to so many different other places that I'm thankful that I didn't just stop at that point, if that makes sense. So I'm glad that there is a journey to be on, and that I'm not striving for some kind of destination where once I get there, what do I do?
Awesome. Thank you. Francine?
And I think for me, it's to know that this is a process, and it's not going to happen overnight. And even for me, there's times when I've come so far and then I've kind of slipped back a little bit. And it's just that time of just keep moving forward and really get to know who God is and who he really is. And so you can trust him.
Awesome. Rich?
I'll say, if you're watching this and you feel like, if you're thinking I don't matter, I'm going to say it doesn't matter, because you do matter. And, so I'm going to keep using my cliche. that as it just takes time and exposure. So trust the process, keep coming back, and I believe that because I believe this is who God is. He's just going to keep reaching out, and you'll believe in him, and you'll realize you do matter, and you'll see and experience the power that he has to change you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And for those of you that are part of our online open share groups, you have a little bit of a break now before we get started at 7 o'clock. And I want to leave you with those closing comments. Remember that you do matter to God.